Hey everybody, how's it going? Oil trains are bad. We gotta go, right? That's the word. So I'm Sean Dixon. I'm New York City staff attorney for Hudson Riverkeeper, and I'm going to waste some of my time at the outset because, as we heard this morning, it's all about you. And because I'm the last one of the day, I'm going to take a panoramic picture of everybody in this room. All right, so we're going to use it. It's going to be awesome. I invite you to join me now, because there are a lot of pessimists and optimists in the room. If you think that we can fix the crude oil by train situation, I want you to smile for the picture. If you think we can stop crude by rail, raise your hands in the air like this. All right, so we're going to go ahead. You can feel free to cheer or shout or anything. All right, we'll start here. Good call. And go. All right. It says slow down, slow down. All right, almost there. You guys, what do you guys think? Don't forget about you. All right, good, thank you. All right, thank you for indulging me. Another big announcement too that in the vein of today's announcements, Port Ambrose, a liquefied natural gas facility off the Jersey Shore, was canceled. And one point of clarification, we heard this morning that dilution is not the solution to pollution. To be more complete about that statement, the solution to pollution is no pollution. So I just want to put that out there as a new slogan we should work on. So a little bit about Hudson Riverkeeper. We are in the Hudson River, and a lot of where I work in New York, that includes the East River. We also work on the Mohawk River and all the little great tributaries that go into the Hudson. We started looking at crude oil probably about 2.5 years ago, as we started noticing it, like all of y'all, coming down the river in ever-increasing quantities. To get rapidly to the bridge issue, I just want to go through a little of the wide variety of things that we work on. We do a lot of education. With more eyes on the river, more Rios joining waterkeepers and volunteers out there, more people counting trains safely from a distance. We don't want to be accused of terrorism here, so you got to keep your distance, but watching those trains go by, the more eyes on the river, the better we're going to be. One example is in the aftermath of any of these spills. The only information we sometimes get from the government is 18 months later. So if we don't know what's going on, we can't take those bits of information and try to make things better. So that kind of transparency only comes from eyes on the problem, and that comes from everybody and everybody's organizations here. The awareness issue. The reason that this rail bridges report is getting a lot of play in the media is, well, because of our fantastic media partners, but also because of the fact that this is like a system we have in New York City called the 311 program. So if you see a car idling in front of a school more than a minute, you can call up 311 and report it. They keep a log of that, and every year groups look at those logs and see, are there larger issues that are slipping through the cracks? Here, we've got hundreds of reports of rail bridges that are slipping through the cracks. They're their own cracks on the rail bridges in some cases. So the raise of awareness here is going to help us tell this story a lot better. We heard a lot about our partners' work on the Hudson on facilities. That is one aspect of this entire problem. It also leads to these transloading facilities and hubs and refineries. That really gets to a larger point that this is indeed something we all know, but that this is all about oil and fossil fuels and the use of those and how we need to reduce those. So there are individual problems with these facilities. There are crude oil by rail problems with these facilities, and they take a lot of work. We also do a lot of work on barges. So at a lot of places, barges come in and they go to these transloading hubs and they get put on barges and taken all around the coast. We have in Albany ships that come all the way up to Albany, take rail brought in crude oil and export it to Canada. So we are our own little mini Keystone pipeline. It actually is a Keystone pipeline because it's the oil that gets to Albany is being exported. It serves no purpose whatsoever, and that is something that a lot of people didn't know. Another thing that hits on the Clean Water Act aspect, every time you have a spill in the state of New York, if you care, you report it, as you're supposed to under the law, to something called the Department of Environmental Conservation's spill team. There's a report every day. You can go in and download a copy of every spill that's been reported in the state of New York. And I review that every morning. Every morning. It's horrible. I see spills all over the state, and there are hundreds at all of these sites. That every time, kudos to people like CSX, and this is the only time you'll hear that in today's day, but kudos to CSX because at their Selkirk yard in Albany, they report every 1 tablespoon of oil that gets dropped on the ballast. They report that. Now, the jury's out whether or not that's all that they're spilling or what they're just reporting to show that they're good stewards. Who knows? But it's a frightening number of spills that are coming from all aspects of the railroad operation. So those are all things that are Clean Water Act problems, that are state enforcement problems. Unfortunately, the states, or the EPA told us when we were in DC having a meeting on this at their National Response Center, that they really don't activate all the bells and whistles of the EPA until oil is reported to have hit water. So all those spills that are hitting the ballast, you could have literally gallons pouring into the rocks that gets into the groundwater, and the state might care, but the EPA says, talk to the state. A proactive regional administrator might hold a great meeting on it, but you're not going to see a lot of change there. So we have more than just rail safety problems ahead of us. Spill response, you're going to hopefully be hearing a lot about this in the future. Oil spill response planning, right now, Federal Railroad Administration lets trains that have any cars with tankers under 1,000 barrels in them to have basic spill response plans. Basic spill response plans don't exist under the law. The law says that law does not authorize FRA to make that up, yet they made that up. So all these tank cars get away with having basic spill response plans. Everybody else has to have what's called a comprehensive spill response plan. There are no tank cars moving any hazardous materials today on the rails that trigger comprehensive spill response plans. None, zero. And the worst part is, they knew that when they made the law, or the regulation. So that is another system that's messed up. We're hopefully going to be seeing a new set of regulations to come from the federal government any day now. A whole bunch of the organizations in this room join me in calling for those rules to be expedited, because we need better regulations on spill response while at the same time we're working on prevention. So that's a little bit about what we're doing. On the issue of bridges, the Waterkeeper Alliance report, which is available, I didn't have any pictures here because I wanted all of you to go to waterkeeper.org and download the report. And because I forgot to make pictures in the presentation. But waterkeeper.org has that. We went around and started looking at bridges in 2014, early 2014. Our boat captain, John Lipscomb, who's been our boat captain for 15 years at Hudson Riverkeeper, went up underneath one of these bridges because, as part of this investigation into the question of terrorism and whether or not that's a good reason to keep information from the public, even though that's information that's publicly available in many cases, he went up to one of these rail bridges in our watershed and decided to test how long it would take anyone to yell at him for being in a boat underneath it. So he went under this rail bridge that was probably, he had to go on one of our small boats, so it was probably 8 feet off the water at low tide, and was hanging out underneath it looking at the bridge. No one came to say anything. He left 3 hours later. No one said anything. And while he was there, we brought an ABC News crew back out there. He was pointing out the fact that this is another thing that you're gonna laugh because it's so obvious to you. The security of our oil tank cars on the rails, how secure can they be if all of them are covered in graffiti? Right? That's insane. And so it's like, yes, security, great, we're doing an amazing job at this. So when he was underneath that bridge, he looked and he was taking pictures the whole time, because we do Clean Water Act enforcement, so he's got like 9 cameras on that boat for anytime we see anything. And there was a whole bunch of new concrete, the new concrete that we saw on some of those that was poured over at the water's edge, ostensibly to help if a boat knocks into it. And so as he's holding on to the new concrete to keep his boat next to the bridge, it gives. And it turns out the whole bridge had been covered in foam that had been painted to look like 10-year-old concrete. So it's not even that you covered it in foam, you painted it to look like concrete. So we said, what's up here? And the railroad said, in a quote yesterday, in response to our rail bridge report, that there is, quote, no relationship between aesthetics and bridge integrity. And I say that those people saying that have no integrity. So that's just my retort to that, but the press didn't ask me. So we said something is wrong. Waterkeeper Line said something is wrong. Everybody else started saying something is wrong with our bridges. And in a statement from, I think, a week and a half ago, the FRA administrator to the Railroad Advisory Committee, Safety Advisory Committee, said that Congress, the public, everybody's going and looking for answers, and they're coming away unconvinced of what they're hearing back from the railroads. The railroads say that that they test it, that every year they send a report in, most of them send a report in to each state, saying that they've investigated the bridges and they are secure and they can handle it. That's 2 sentences that I just gave you. Usually they just give 1 and say that everything's all okay. So this week, 2 days ago, I got a Freedom of Information Act release from the New York State Department of Transportation that they shared with me, because they had to, not because they wanted to. They shared with me a report that they had sent to a railroad bridge owner that was what they call a red flag report that had a series of pictures. And it consisted, and I'm not kidding you, entirely of, this is a picture of the bridge I was looking at. This is generally where it was. We think you're the owner, and a series of pictures with red circles around nuts, bolts, and cracks that were missing. So that's what the state is doing too. It's exactly what we went out there and did. So we keep hearing, but we're not engineers, but we're not bridge inspectors, we're none of those things. Well, the state sent out their, I hope, bridge engineers, and they saw the exact same things we saw, and they told the railroad company. You want to know what the railroad company said? Everything is fine, it can support the weight of the trains. So this is happening all over the country. Well, that leads me to my immediate next point. We think it's happening all over the country because there exists no national inventory of rail bridges. It is not likely, but like Tennessee might have no rail bridges. Or all of the rail bridges might be in Tennessee. I don't know, because we don't have an inventory. There's no way to test that hypothesis. Well, at least we know 2 have them. So this, Pennsylvania and maybe Tennessee. So let me throw something else out there. In 2008, which was 7 years ago, a law was passed that said for the first time ever, the Federal Railroad Administration was supposed to do something to ensure that bridges did not cause accidents or take lives. 2008. What were we doing before then? Absolutely nothing. So that's exactly the problem we're facing, is that this is a very new program. Under that law, the railroad bridge owners are required to develop bridge management programs that have within them, you have to have engineers, certified engineers and inspectors. You have to keep records. I should go through the list before I tear it apart. You have to keep records, make a list of your bridge, and do inspections and repairs as needed. Under that, the keep records bit, just for a little bit of granularity in the law here, says that you have to keep your inspection reports until you get new inspection reports, and then you can get rid of the old inspection reports. Now, as somebody that sues polluters for meager living, I can tell you that having a series of reports is very useful. And so because the regulations let them just chuck their old reports, we basically only have the most recent ones to look at. Now, the regulations, which is where everything gets implemented, also go on and talk about those old inspection and audit reports from more than, say, 2 years ago. The FRA isn't allowed to use them in enforcement actions. They're only allowed to use the current inspection reports. So we have a messed up system. The discretion as to whether or not a bridge is functional or not is entirely left up to, oh no, the timekeeper's coming up. Okay. Sorry.
The dreaded moment.
So the inspection is left entirely up to, the discretion is left entirely up to the bridge owner. If the bridge owner inspectors think that it's fine, the bridge is fine, and railroad trains can rumble over them. An important note on railroad trains and everything that's rumbling over them, these bridges, like we heard a moment ago, they include sometimes, depending on the discretion of the rail bridge owner, they can include small causeways over culverts, or they cannot. There's very little guidance as to what actually it becomes a rail bridge. We also have, these rail bridges, there's a rail bridge underneath West Point on the Hudson. You'd think the DOD would care. So we're calling on them to do that. These bridges transport, like we saw, the placards for the 1267s. We're only a 20% subset of the data from the inspected bridges from the videos. The rest of that could be corn, but A, that can still derail and cause damage, and B, there's tons of other hazardous materials that cross these things. A rail bridge led to the Paulsboro derailment in New Jersey a couple of years ago. These are really, really dangerous problems. And so the discretion is entirely left to the bridge owners. A couple other the kind of implementation gaps, which is the nicest way a lawyer has of talking about failures that the federal government has left us with. The implementation gaps on this is that for a lot of rail bridges, the railroads are allowed to do tabletop estimates of the loadings. They get the original plans of the bridge, and an engineer looks at them and says, this is how much the bridge can handle. That would be as if, what was it, Volkswagen did the emissions thing? Is that Volkswagen? Okay, yeah. If they didn't even test the cars, if they just said, this is the equipment we're putting in, and it's fine. It's worse that they tested the cars and it wasn't fine, but they're allowed to just look at these bridge designs and say, this is what the load can handle. Now, another kicker is that if a bridge in the United States, as of the 2008 law, didn't have a listed maximum load, to the railroad's only concern, because again, the FRA doesn't do anything about this. So if the railroad doesn't have an idea as to how much loading a bridge can handle, they have until March of next year to have finished that. They were given 8 years to put loading. So there are bridges right now that the railroads never had and still doesn't have an idea as to how much loading it can handle. That to me is shockingly scary. Another thing, the engineers and inspectors, under the regulations, these bridge management plans have to have certified engineers and certified inspectors involved in all decision making. There are no standards as to what certified bridge engineers or inspectors mean, and generally the regulations say that that they don't need to be on site for any of the inspections. And I don't have the quote in front of me. To be fair, to roll it back a little bit, to be fair, like it's, if you're an inspector, you can have people at the other end of the bridge saying like, yeah, there's cracks here too, but I think that that's a loophole that still needs to be addressed. They don't need to see all reports. That they don't need to see all reports was the kicker that got me from the regulation guidance document that FRA put out. Again, a lot of these quotes and a lot of these sites are in the Waterkeeper Alliance report that we published this week. The audits that the railroad bridge companies have to have for their bridge management plans can be done in-house. So the Federal Railroad Administration said about these audits in their guidance document that audits should not be done by the people that are responsible for the bridge management programs, but they can be done in-house. So if CSX owns a number of rail bridges, they just have to not have their engineers and inspectors in their bridge management department do the audits. Now, I don't know, I'm just raising this as a red flag. I don't know if that's the silver bullet to all this. There are a lot of silver bullets here. But that's another question that I would have if Sarah Feinberg, the FRA administrator, was sitting here today. Is that good enough? Do you think that that's good enough? Or are you, like Congress, not really satisfied with that answer? Under their own data, FRA has observed, quote, observed or audited about 5% of rail bridges nationwide. Again, we don't know how many rail bridges there are nationwide. So we don't know if this is the answer. So there's a lot of huge questions that come just out of reading the 40-page guidance document implementing the 2008 law that said you have to have a bridge management plan. And these are things that we came across just by reading, and when we added up what things that we were seeing on the rivers with these bridges, where there was literally fake concrete, there were bridges where we went to senators across the country with 4 really egregious bridges, and the railroads first said that they're fine, then the FRA said that the railroads say that they're fine, then we didn't believe either of them, and then eventually for 4 of these bridges, which are detailed in the report, we've seen actual reconstruction going on after they were supposedly fine. This is a huge problem, and thank everybody for helping us with the report, and if you haven't, read it. I think that the other thing to look at after this as next steps and close is that this is just one of those things. I, as an environmental attorney, I looked at railroads with a questioning gaze before I started working on crude oil. Now it just scares the crap out of me because this is a hugely complicated industry, and we just looked at moving stuff and now bridges. Now we need to start looking at the crossings like we heard about. There's a whole crossings report that came out of a lot of the industry getting yelled at by communities. There's all the other hazardous materials that aren't getting the attention that crude oil is, that are still operating at different levels of speed and safety. There's the outcome of the rulemaking that we're probably going to hear about in just a little bit. So there are several other elements of this huge problem, whole silos of problems that we need to continue working on. Thank you very much.